William Barger, former offensive lineman at the University of Alabama. We call him a Crimson Tide insider to talk a lot of Alabama Crimson Tide football. Hey, William, I hope you're having a great day, man. Welcome into the end. I was about to say the end of the game, but into Alabama tradition.
Hey, Ryan, how are you? I got all excited. I thought Hee-Haw was joining us there for a minute.
See, y'all can get away with that. If I called him, I wouldn't get that same treatment, I can promise you. But I guess it's all about that chemistry in that locker room. You guys aggravate one another. But if I use that name, I'd be in the doghouse. I would never get a lunch or a dinner or nothing.
Well, it's funny in the soft world that we live in these days. If people knew about the bullying and the hazing and the 24/7, making fun of each other that went on, inside that Alabama locker room from when I was down there from 89 to 93, they'd be horrified. But that's just the culture that it was.
Sure. Well, and you look at Alabama Crimson Tide football, and, we do, we talk about chemistry of, football, and many times, and it's so fun from an outsider to see that chemistry and that fraternity that you guys live in, regardless of which era. You go to the 90 players, you guys can connect with the 70 guys. The 70 guys connect with the current guys. It's just something about wearing that crimson uniform and that bond that all of you guys have.
Well, absolutely. And, that's one of the, the great things about, the relationships that we all formed with each other. I mean, I've run into guys that I haven't seen, since 1993. And, we're always able to pick up where we left off. And, the exchanges back and forth are still the same. And, we're all a lot closer to being 50 than we were at the time being, 21, 22, 23. And most of us still think that we're that age mentally, but physically we're a long way from it. But, the one thing that I would somewhat disagree with is, I think my group of guys that went through there in a 4 or 5 year period in the early 90s, yes, we can connect with, the guys from the 70s and the 60s, but it's a little bit more difficult to connect, I think, from the standpoint with the Nick Saban era players because, they didn't have, they've never been through 35 spring practices where 30 of them were in full pads. They've never been through, 3-a-days and 2-a-days, where, you were so beat up and sore that versus climbing, 2 or 3 flights of steps at Bryant Hall after, the lunch was over with between the morning and the afternoon practice, a better option for you was just to flop down on one of the leather couches in the lobby of Bryant Hall, versus going upstairs to your room and your bed. And that's something that's gone and won't ever come back in the game of college football.
What do you think the biggest loss when we don't have 2-a-days? What do you think the biggest impact really is from a physical conditioning standpoint?
I don't think it's so much from a physical conditioning standpoint, Ryan. I think it's a mental conditioning standpoint. The level of mental toughness that it takes to, get through, especially I think more so in the spring, when you don't have an opponent to prepare for and you're out there beating up on each other, that was a rough deal, to, have 35 practices and, 30 of them being in full pads. And then, you segue into the 2-a-days in August. My freshman year under Bill Curry in 1989, it was 3-a-day practices. And,
wow.
That's just a tough deal, mentally to get through, because I think anybody that, gets to the SEC level as a football player coming out of high school, pretty much everybody, thought they worked hard and, lifted weights hard and practiced hard. And then, you get up to that level and all of a sudden you get slapped right in the face. No, you really didn't. And this is a new dynamic with a new hurdle to overcome. I mean, it was rough.
Well, I want to ask you about recruiting, then we'll work our way back to what Nick Saban has called. Anyway, he said, well, we call it camp, but we really didn't have a camp, so I don't know what you want to call it, leading up to the first game. But going back to recruiting, what do you think has allowed Alabama to make this switch? I mean, we were looking at the month of May and going, man, Nick Saban has drifted away. They were ranked about 58th in the country. 12th in the SEC at one time, but somewhere the light switch on. What led to this complete reverse, and now they're number one in the country according to some of these recruiting services?
Well, I mean, I think first and foremost you have to go back to, the conversation that Nick Saban had on the jet when Mal Moore went down there and scooped him up from Miami in January of 2007, I guess it was.
Yeah.
I think my dates are right.
Late 2006, early 2007. Yeah.
Yeah. He told Mal, he said, Mal, you just made the comment to me that you think you've hired the best, college football coach in the country. He said, I'm not the best college football coach in the country, but I'm the best damn recruiter in the country. and so you can't ever discount that, number one. Number two, they have got such an elite resume when it comes to recruiting and developing players on both sides of the line of scrimmage, which you and I have had this conversation over and over again. That's where it all starts and stops. If you've got the best big Jimmys and Joes on both sides of the line of scrimmage, that's half the battle. But in the last 5 years, that's actually even segued out away from the line of scrimmage. I mean, now he's got, in a given, season, I mean, he's got 3 or 4 first-round draft picks at wide receiver. He's got a couple of first-round draft picks at running back. And, look at all the first-round draft picks that he's produced at DB. Quite a few at linebacker as well. I mean, it's just, it's a no-brainer when you look at the facilities, how he develops these kids off the field in the classroom, and, whether or not they, become NFL football players. I mean, you can go out there and get a job as a weightlifting coach at the college level and make $500,000 a year right now. So there's all kinds of attractions that are down there in Tuscaloosa, but, call me a homer or whatever you want to, but I've yet to see another coach in the last 10 years that develops guys both on and off the field and prepares them for life after football any better than Nick Saban has.
Well, and you hear a lot of people saying that just handles with the day of life. And I think you see that with players when you go to the next level, that you've got to have that self-discipline that you're taught for these 3 or 4 years to make it at that next level. You don't have somebody looking over you. They'll just cut you and not pay you. But 56, 57 guys in the National Football League, I mean, that's crazy to even step back and think about those numbers at the next level. I mean, that's an entire roster in the NFL belonging to the University of Alabama, not just playing, not just occupying a spot, but being some of the best at their position.
Well, I think, this guy that I'm going to bring up, it may sound like some home cooking since I'm a former offensive lineman, but, if you go and look at the accolades at the college level, I mean, Ryan Kelly wasn't necessarily a decorated superstar, during his time at Alabama. I mean, this is a guy that was for an Alabama recruit, based on the recruiting services, he was a low 3-star recruit. I think one of the reasons why they got him out of the state of Ohio was because Ohio State didn't offer him. And I think the Indianapolis Colts just made him the highest paid center in the NFL to the tune of $50 million. So, that's the thing. I mean, anybody can go out and evaluate the Julio Jones, the Derrick Henrys, those guys. But, this is a guy that, coming out of high school, he wasn't highly rated. Coming out of Alabama, he wasn't a first-round draft pick, I don't think. If he was, it was late round. But, he's gone up there in Indianapolis and proven his worth and has gotten paid accordingly. And now I know he is, without a doubt, one of Nick Saban's favorite former players. He has the utmost respect. I know Mario Cristobal does as well. Just a great story about a great young man. Bradley Bozeman, is another one.
Great point.
3-star recruit. He's gone up there and carved out a niche for himself in Baltimore, done some great things from, giving back to the community, that tour that him and his wife went on with their camper. We could sit here and talk for hours about, what these guys do once they do get to the next level and how they give back to their communities. And that's what it's all about.
Well, and you see that. I've asked several players, whether it's Reggie Ragland up in North Alabama or Kenyon Drake with some of the things. I said, where did you guys learn to give back? And it's Nick Saban. He sets that with his message, don't pray to be blessed, pray to be a blessing. And these players take that into consideration. We could talk about this all night. Let me move back to this camp because, like I said, we'll get things started and we'll be talking about this because I love to talk about what Alabama's been able to accomplish under Nick Saban in these last 13 years. When you look at this camp, let me give you the flexibility to go where you need to go. We're closing down this portion of camp and opening up more of a game preparation. What's been your biggest takeaway?
A couple of things. I think the fan base is a little shaky about, you've got now, 2 scrimmages, the only 2 scrimmages in this camp, where the offense has kind of had their way with the defense. And I don't think that's anything to panic about because I think this offense is pretty much going to have their way with whoever they play. When you look at, the talent level on the offensive line, the wide receivers, the quarterback position, the running backs, maybe the only one position that's not really up to the rest of that level is the tight end position. They're going to have their way with most defenses. And I also think that, having some time to reflect on it and think about it, let's look at it this way. Let's just pretend like Dylan Moses wasn't lost for the season last year. Let's pretend like DJ Dale wasn't lost for the season last year. I know he tried to play through it, but his knee was shot from the Duke game. And also losing LeBron Ray, I think, in the South Carolina game. Just addition by subtraction, having those 3 guys back, and hopefully all 3 can stay healthy through this abbreviated season. I think that's going to make the defense, that much better. So I get the old adage that, if the defense isn't ahead of the offense, then maybe that's a concern, but I just don't think that applies to the amount of weapons and having a offensive line that a lot of, people are saying it's probably going to be the best offensive line in the country this year. And I don't disagree with that. It's a very difficult proposition for, Pete Golding or Brent Venerables or whoever to slow that unit down. And I think the people that I've heard the most buzz about is, Bryce Young's probably ready to play at quarterback as a true freshman, and I think he'll play versus Missouri. But, Mac Jones has worked very hard. He's elevated his game. And I think it's going to take a meltdown from him, for Bryce Young to become the starter sometime this season. The other guy that you hear all the talk about is Will Anderson at outside linebacker. Especially now that there's 2 weeks until the Missouri game, I think you could already pencil him in as one of the rabbit package edge rushers. But it wouldn't surprise me if he doesn't bump one of those 2 guys in front of him and become, a 1st and 10 guy. Those are the guys. And I think also, too, it sounds like after struggling through the first portion of fall camp, I think Trey Sanders, showed flashes Saturday that maybe he's turned the corner and getting past that foot injury that he suffered. And, I think we all know that Brian Robinson's a good running back, but, the 2 true freshmen, Roydell Williams and Jace McClellan have had 2 very good scrimmages. So, when you factor that in and then, you get out there to the wide receiver positions, I think John Mechie is a guy that would have started at a lot of other colleges last year. But when you look at what he had in front of him, with Henry Ruggs and Jerry Jeudy and Jalen Waddle and Devonta Smith, and then the true freshman Javon Baker, I think, has got a chance to, along with Slade Bolden, to carve out some really good roles for themselves in that wide receiver rotation this season as well.
William, let me spend time as we continue to talk about the offensive side of the football. Where do you think Landon Dickerson ends up? What are you hearing? Because you have to be able to say, give up what you were able to do last year. And I know they're trying to get the best 5 on the field, but you look at what Landon Dickerson did as a newcomer, a grad transfer here in Alabama last year. I thought it was something that maybe we overlook a little bit too much, kind of fitting in with that team and building that kind of mentality on that offensive line. Where do you think Landon Dickerson ends up when all's said and done?
Well, I think he's going to be the starting center, Ryan.
Okay.
And I thought, in my mind, that the best 5 this season would have been, Dickerson at one guard and Deontay Brown at the other and Darian Dalcourt at center. Maybe Dalcourt needs a little bit more time. My guess is probably to add good weight and get a little bit bigger and stronger. But I've got no problem with, especially after what happened last year where they waited until, basically I think October the 1st to insert him at center. They're not, waiting this year. I think they've already identified that, having him at center and Brown at one guard and Ekiyor at the other to go along with Neal and Leatherwood is the best 5. I'm glad to see them making that decision 2 weeks before the first game versus Missouri versus fiddling around with that best 5, chemistry mix like they did last year up until whenever they did insert Dickerson at center. I mean, I think, Owens is a great utility player. He can play, basically all 5 positions at a decent level, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think Landon Dickerson has a chance, at the next level. He can play, all 3 interior offensive line positions, left guard, center, right guard. He's explosive. He's got a mean streak. I know a lot of people got after him, when he had that personal foul last year early in the season. But, I don't ever fault a player for that. You just got to time it a little bit better before the whistle blows. He is really impressed me as a player because, my only experience at watching him when he was at Florida State, they had him stuck out there, I think, playing right tackle. And, he struggled a little bit. He was nowhere near the player at right tackle for Florida State that he's been for Alabama at, a guard or a center position. Great player, nasty, old school.
Let's flip to the other side of the football, and Nick Saban even pointed this out as he talked about the offensive line. Was spent time talking about the defensive front, but he said it's great competition when you can go up against our bunch every day in practice. When you look at this defensive line, I think the one thing that you have to start with is they've got some depth. They've got some bodies that can rotate, not maybe where we were at, 2016? We had those 9-10 guys we could rotate through there. But it seems like this defensive line, a lot of talent and a lot of depth.
No, absolutely. I think that was one of my other, constant complaints about last year was, it was obvious, especially with the early departure of Quinnen Williams, as a coaching staff, who's the guy, standing over there next to me on the sideline that's going to be close to being as disruptive as Quinnen Williams was. Well, it was obvious probably the South Carolina game, that was Christian Barmore. And their reluctance to play him more than they did, if you look at what his stats were last year based on the number of game reps that he got, it's a no-brainer who that was. It was Christian Barmore. So, now if you're looking at the base 3-4 lineup, which you see less and less these days because of the spread teams, they have to play, nickel so much. But, if you look at the base lineup with Barmore, at 1-5 technique and Ray at the other and Dale at nose, that's better than what we had last year. You've got guys like, Justin Abogier, who's pushing to be a starter. You've got Byron Young over there, and, a guy that's played a lot of football and I think been very, productive for Alabama. And Fadarian Mathis, he's probably going to be Dale's backup. I think there is a lot of depth there. They've got good depth at, all the linebacker positions and on the back end. The easiest way for that defense to get better than what they were last year is to be able to generate an organic pass rush on obvious passing downs, whether it's 2nd and 8 or 3rd and 6. And, I think you're going to probably see that at some point in time this season, and I expect it to be Will Anderson and Drew Sanders.
This defense give a lot of expectations. We've spent some time talking earlier about the linebackers. I know you mentioned Will Anderson, but let's move on back to that third level for a couple of minutes. What's your kind of confidence that this unit, because the current day of college football, you got to be able to play in open space. Can this unit get it done when you begin to look at this secondary?
Yeah, I think the biggest key for that to happen, Ryan, is are we going to actually get to see a injury-free and fully invested mentally Josh Jobe in 2020? I think he is the, kind of the kickoff point for the back end of that defense, which, if the quarterback only has 2.5 seconds to get rid of the football, it makes all those guys on the back end's jobs a lot easier. Going back to, when I played, everybody used to talk about Antonio Langham and George Teague and, all those great players on the back end of that 92 defense. Well, guess what? Their job, not to take anything away from them as, cover guys, but their jobs were real easy because the opposing quarterback only had 2.5 seconds before Eric Curry and John Copeland was hitting them in the ear hole. But there's a lot of moving parts going on back there. Specifically at the safety positions, you got DeMarco Helms, and I think you're probably going to see Surtain, kind of, maybe assuming that Minkah Fitzpatrick center field headhunting role at safety in the nickel and dime package. But to me, I think the key on that back end is a totally healthy, fully invested Josh Jobe.
You kind of, look back at the Michigan game. He stood in there and gave Alabama some solid play there. When you look at the defensive back, Brian Branch, even Jalen Waddle today, throwing some great praise to Brian Branch, Malachi Moore. But you look at a tough position. Looks like those true freshmen are going to get their first crack at it.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that's good. Competition breeds success, and that's the beauty of this Nick Saban Alabama program. If you're one of those, and I think that's where the key to a championship run is with any program. I think Nick Saban's got a pretty good idea who his starting 22 are on both sides of the football. But where a championship program is bred and produced is who are the next 22. And I think that's where Nick Saban and this Alabama coaching staff is going to make their focus over the next 2 weeks prior to the Missouri game is, hey, we've got to figure out who, the second 22 are. Look, if there's a COVID outbreak and, some guys get quarantined and stuff, somebody posed this question to me on another radio show over the weekend. What would Clemson season look like, if they were to lose Trevor Lawrence to COVID? Well, I would basically equate it to Alabama losing Dylan Moses for the season last year you probably would have just had Christian Harris as a true freshman playing next to him. You lose Dylan Moses for the season, and you've got two true freshmen out there probably lost and swimming mentally in the playbook in Christian Harris and Lee. You know, how different would have that inside linebacker play have looked last year had it been Dylan Moses and just one true freshman standing next to him?
William, this is probably one of the most comprehensive interviews that we do. We do it as often as we possibly can, and we always get a lot of great praise from our conversations. I look up at the clock, and my producer's giving me the break sign, get out of here, because I ran right through that last break, but it's definitely worth it when we can catch up with you, William. I appreciate the conversation. Crimson Tide insider, former offensive lineman at the University of Alabama, national champion winning offensive lineman. William, thank you for giving us a couple of minutes here in Tuscaloosa.